أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Greetings of peace to you all. We want to welcome our guests and friends in South Africa, the United States, and around the world to this week's edition of A Conversation with El-Hajj Mauri Saalakhan. I am pleased to be your host, once again coming to you from the Salam Media platform out of Johannesburg, South Africa. Salam Media is an online portal for humanitarian journalism. We don't just report the news, we advise you on what you can do about it. This afternoon, this evening in South Africa, we are blessed once again to have a return guest with us who really needs no introduction. Sheikh Abdullah Hakim Quick is an American-Canadian scholar of Islam, a very well-known and respected brother throughout the Western Hemisphere and in different parts of the world. He is known. In fact, I'm sure that the vast majority of those of you who will be tuning in to this broadcast live, as well as those who will be joining later through the subhanAllah, something is happening here. Okay. I don't know if it's on my end or on the broadcast station's end, but inshallah ta'ala we'll plow through it. Sheikh Abdullah Hakim Quick is a return guest. He's a scholar of renown, and without any further ado, despite the challenges we're having right now, we want to invite him to the platform and begin this very important conversation during the blessed month of Ramadan, subhanAllah, during the month known as Black History Month. Oh, brother, what's going on with your brother Saalakhan today? MashaAllah. Welcome, my brother. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, may Allah make it easy for you and for the rest of the world.
Ameen. Ameen. We need relief. That is for sure. Sheikh Abdullah, we are in the month that is internationally known as Black History Month. It's not just relegated to the United States of America and other parts of the West. You have decided to embark upon a very important presentation during this month titled African Sunrise, the Heart of Islamic Revival in West Africa. And I believe there is a very special focus on Sheikh Usman and Fodio. Before we get into this course that you have begun, I believe it started yesterday, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
I want to invite you, for the benefit of those who don't know who you are, to share a little bit about your background, because you have a very interesting background, and so please.
Yes, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah wa ba'd. I was born in the United States. My grandmother on my mother's side had come to America from the island of Barbados. That's in the West Indies, so that's Caribbean region. My father was African American, and within his family there is some native Mohawk roots as well. But we primarily African American family. I grew up in the 60s. So this is a turbulent time in America.
Yes, it was.
And I was involved in a number of different actions. I went to Reed College, which is in the west coast of the United States. And we formed the Black Student Union in 1967. We seized the building. It's the same time as San Francisco State, the big revolt in California.
Mm-hmm.
And we succeeded in getting Black studies. But it was watered down, and I eventually left that college, got drafted to the Vietnam War. I refused to fight in the war, and I ended up in Canada. And there, alhamdulillah, I embraced Islam. And after 2 years, I was fortunate enough to be able to go overseas. And I was one of the two students who went to Medina University, Islamic University of Medina. And I, alhamdulillah, finished the course, spent 7 years in Saudi Arabia, went into the field of Dawah, United States, in Los Angeles. I was in Jamaica, West Indies for 4 years, back in Canada. And alhamdulillah, I even spent 10 years in South Africa, in Cape Town, where I was involved with the Muslim Judicial Council, and then formed a group called Discover Islam. And so with this as a background, I traveled to different parts of the world, eventually returning to Canada, involved with the Islamic Institute of Toronto and Al-Maghrib Institute. I'm the director of history for Al-Maghrib Institute. And alhamdulillah, Allah blessed me to travel to about 63 countries doing research and dawah, and to be able to meet Muslims and share information. At the same time, after I got the BA from Medina, I continued on. Even though I was doing dawah work, I got a master's and PhD from the University of Toronto in African history. And I focused on West African Islamic history. This was my passion because of my love, for my roots coming out of West Africa. And then also realizing that before the colonial period, they were writing in Arabic. So I had access to information that the Orientalist scholars had difficulty. They had to pay somebody to translate.
Right.
But I was able to read the documents directly. And so this gave me a type of insight that allowed me to go over some of the barriers they put in front of history students. And I was able to do a PhD and come back and be in the field. So this really, this work we're discussing this month in Black History Month is sort of the fruit, of those many years in the field. I did field work in Nigeria, traveled around Kano, Sokoto, Kaduna, Abuja, Zaria, the great cities of the north, met great scholars, African scholars. It was an amazing adventure for me. And so I'm sharing some of the fruits of this journey.
Alhamdulillah. You are well positioned. By the grace and mercy of Allah Ta'ala, you are well positioned to deliver the kind of information that you're going to be delivering today. I really am grateful to Allah to have you on this platform, to be able to share some of what you are sharing through the course that you are now embarking upon in this month of Black history, this focus on Black history in America and other parts of the world. Yours is a 365-day-a-year passion, mashallah. African Sunrise, the heart of Islamic revival in West Africa. Why did you choose this as the curriculum you wanted to present during this month?
Mm-hmm. Well, first off, when we look at history itself, and in this case, we're focusing on Black history. Somebody would say, what would a Dawah student, from Medina, graduating from an international Islamic university, want to go into Black history for? That's the area of Black nationalists, and political people. But what I realized in being involved in Dawah is that the best way to speak to people is through what they are involved in and what they are concerned about.
Mhm.
And the area of history is a very important area that is overlooked by many individuals. And Carter G. Woodson, the famous Black American historian, in 1926, he started Black History Week, eventually turned into Black History Month, accepted by the United States government, the Canadian government. He had some very interesting statements that people may not be aware of, and I want to just share with you this statement to you. He said, teaching Black history, in this case it's like African history, Black history, is essential to ensure the physical and intellectual survival of the race within the broader society. He said, if a race has no history, it has no worthwhile tradition. It becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world, and it stands in danger of being exterminated. So this is a very important point, and being concerned with spreading Islam in America, and it is part of the Islamic way that somebody should come, as the Quran says, let somebody come from every tribe, from every nation, and take this message back to his people. And so being concerned with the plight of the oppressed people in the Americas, especially African American people, I realized that it was essential to deconstruct the present history, which is a set of lies and distortions, and to try to bring some solid history and at the same time connect it with Islam. And so that would be accomplishing more than one accomplishment at the same time. They say killing two birds with one stone. That has been a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that I was able to continue my personal passion of getting into African history and roots, what we call it, and at the same time continue in the path of the Dawah, and that is the spread of Islam to all peoples throughout the planet. So it is this time, it is in this month that many people focus on Black history and African history because, it is recognized, it has been deleted from history or it's been distorted. And this is very important to us when we look at the subject. Now, you can see that the subject is saying African sunrise. So it's talking about a sunrise. And we are all now locked down because of COVID-19. In the north, we're freezing, in Canada, -8 degrees. And for many people, there's darkness, around the world spreading. So this is a sunrise. And we approach this subject through Islamic revival. And the concept of Islamic revival, tajdeed, is something that affects all Muslims. Because the Muslim world, we could say, is also in a state of stagnation. And there's a need to revive Islam. And that does not mean reform Islam, where you change it to meet the modern so-called standards. But no, you revive the original principles in a new context. And one of the contemporary scholars in speaking about this Islamic revival, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, who was a known Egyptian scholar, he said, you combine, he said, al-qadim al-nafi' wal-jadid al-salih. You combine the beneficial of the past with the appropriate of the present. You see, so you taken the principles of Islam and you putting it in the right context today. So this is what the revival really is. And what this subject does, it takes us on a journey through Islam in Africa for those who are not aware of how Islam entered into Africa. Many people think that Islam entered into Africa as Arab slave traders. But the reality is the first Hijrah, the first migration that the Prophet ﷺ sent his companions was to Ethiopia, to Africa. And so they entered into what is now Eritrea and Ethiopia as refugees. And the emperor of the Aksumite Empire, Ashama an-Najashi, he took them in, gave them sanctuary, a Christian. And so this is the first contact that was made. These are Muslims coming from an Arabian prophet who was the last prophet, but dealing with a Christian who believes in one God. And they found unity. And the emperor gave them sanctuary. And so that was the first entrance. And then we covered Islam in North Africa, how the Muslims were responding to the Roman attacks in the Mediterranean, and how they opened up North Africa. And then they went across the desert. And they realized that there was a gold trade going on, that the largest active gold mines in the world at that time were in the Niger River Valley. That's in West Africa. And so the trade started to open up, and the Muslims revolutionized the trade, but also not only brought goods, but they brought ideas. And so Islam then moved along with the trade routes and moved with the people. And so what we are going into with the next phase of our discussion, it's every Saturday from 1:30 to 3:30 Eastern Standard Time that we have this course. It's international. Alhamdulillah, we have students from all over the world who are taking this course. And we're going right into the heart of an Islamic revival. And this is very important because we don't want to just talk theoretical, but we want to look at something which is practical and something that we can actually connect with our own roots today. And this is where the individual, Sheikh Uthman Dan Fodio, rahimahullah, I found him to be the perfect person who is sort of that medium point that connects the past to the present. And in studying Sheikh Uthman Dan Fodio, I got very personal, because in 1984, I was invited to the Islam in Africa conference in Abuja, Nigeria. At that time, I was doing Dawah in Jamaica, and I was known to be into African history. So the brothers invited me to represent the Caribbean, and they invited Imam Warithuddin Muhammad, rahimahullah, to represent the United States. Mm-hmm. Imam Warithuddin wasn't able to come, so I represented the whole of the Americas. And just about every scholar and leader of any type of worth came to this conference. The top Salafis, the top Sufis, the top movement leaders, all types of people were at this conference. It was a feast, for those who are hungry for knowledge. Yeah. Great ulama were there. And I was a young person in the field, and I was just soaking it all in. And I was fortunate to meet some great scholars. And this is where I presented for the first time my story about deeper roots. And I showed what happened to the Muslims when they were captured and taken to the Caribbean, South America, and United States and Canada. What happened to them? They didn't know. And so when I presented this paper, it had a big impact on people. And so they opened their doors to me. And I was able to get information that was not available even to the European scholars. They wouldn't let them come near their archives. But they let me in the vault. And some of their top scholars advised me. Just imagine, this is the time, it's hard for people today, especially younger generation, who grew up with cell phones and, the discs and, whatnot, and hard drives. And I took documents 100, 200, 300 years old. They gave it to me to carry across the street to make a photocopy of. Wow. My hand is trembling.
Wow.
I made a photocopy of this and then brought it back safely to the scholars, and then had them bound together, and then brought 37 original documents of Sheikh Uthman Dan Fodio back to Canada, to the University of Toronto, where I analyzed this. And I met members of his family. I visited his grave site where his children were, and his wives. I got very personal with this. And I went so deep into his life that I realized that part of his life from 1774 to 1804, this is 30 years when he was in the field as an Islamic as a scholar, it was similar to what I was going through in my own life. because I was challenged in 1985 to be the Imam of the Jami Mosque in Toronto, which was the largest Islamic center in Canada at the time. I had 1,000 people for Jummah from all over the Muslim world. I wasn't sure how to approach this. And so I went right into the teachings of Sheikh Uthman bin Fodio. He became my guide. So I literally lived his teachings. And when you see where he was coming from, it's amazing how relevant what he was saying to his people in those days is today. And so this is what we will be looking at. And I'll be opening up the door to people to the study of Sheikh Uthman bin Fodio and sharing this amazing information.
Sheikh Quick, on the issue of ideas and revival, can you share a little bit more about who this personality, Sheikh Uthman bin Fodio, was, and when he lived and where?
Okay, Sheikh Uthman bin Fodio was from the people that are now known as the Fulla, or the Fulani people, Fulbe. And they originated in the Senegal Valley region, and this is what is called the Futa Toro. They were primarily nomadic people. And so they moved from one section of the savannah to another. You know, that section of Africa, right under the Sahara Desert, there is a savanna, which is like flat land. And it's grassy land. And it goes from the Atlantic all the way to the Red Sea. And so it's that savanna region where great Islamic movements actually came up, was in this region there. And the area of the Futa Toro was the first place where people accepted Islam in West Africa. And this is going back to like the 10th century, when the trading caravans were coming across from the north in a place called Takror. And Takror was that first Islamic empire. And this is where the Fulla people had established themselves. And so Sheikh Uthman bin Fodio's people, came out of that area and they migrated east. And there was a scholarly clan within the Fulbe or Fulla people called Turudbe. And these are people who dedicated their life to scholarship. And so Sheikh Uthman, rahimahullah, he grew up within the Turudbe clan. And this is very important because you will see how they actually influenced movements all throughout West Africa, Central Africa, especially in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. Most of the revolutions and Islamic movements were actually led by the Fulbe, or the Fulla people, this Turudbe clan. So Sheikh Uthman's people migrated to a place called Hausa land, and the Bilad al-Hausa. And this is now in northern Nigeria. It also goes over to Niger and other. It's a huge area. It's sort of the central part of West Africa. Mm-hmm. And the Hausa is one of the largest groups in West Africa. They had embraced Islam way back as well, around the 12th century or so. It was the Wangara, who are another important group, Mande or Mandinka, right? They had brought Islam there to Hausa land. So Sheikh Uthman bin Fodio's people, they're nomadic, and so they moved over into the area of Hausa land, and they were scholars. His grandmother was a scholar. His mother was a scholar. His father was a scholar. His uncles were scholar. When you say his name in the Fulfulde language, which is the Fulla language, they say Usman bin Fodio, which means in Arabic you'd say Uthman ibn Fudi or Ibn Muallim. He is Uthman, the son of a scholar. That's what that means. So when you say Dan Fodio, he is the son of a scholar. Mm-hmm. And so he grew up in scholarship, memorized the Quran from a young age, studied under great scholars, not only from the Fulla, but from the Tuareg and from the different nations that were there. And he, by 20 years old, he became faqih. He was a master of Maliki fiqh. He had mastered Islamic sciences, and he went into the field. So what I love about him is that he is really a man of the people. So he didn't stay just amongst the scholars. He traveled throughout Hausa land. It's a huge territory, thousands of miles, moving around from place to place, teaching people. This is from 1774 to 1804. Mm-hmm. He's teaching people, he's interacting with people. And he's looking at the problems, the real problems in society, and he's bringing Islamic solutions to them. So he's not just talking theoretical aqidah or theoretical fiqh. He's looking at the problems people had in their marriages, even the problems of sexuality, the problems in business, the problems in their running their societies. He looked at the scholars, what were the weaknesses in the scholars, and he focused on women. He actually liberated women at the time. He did things for women that is unheard of. I don't know anybody, maybe in the whole Muslim world, who at that time was doing what he did for women within this context of revival. And so he revived Islam, and he did it in a scholarly way. So he wrote a book, Ihya Sunnah wa Ihmad al-Bid'ah. It is bringing life to the Sunnah and destroying innovations, which you would consider to be a great Salafi book, right? They destroy the bid'ah, mm-hmm. Right? At the same time, in spirituality, he was initiated into the Qadariyah tariqah, and he was considered to be one of the highest levels of the Qadariyah tariqah in West Africa. So he was, in a sense, a Salafi and a Sufi combined. Now that in itself speaks volumes for today and what we're
going through. Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
At the same time, he was a movement leader. He's going from place to place, reviving people's deen. So he would be a Tablighi Jamaat. He was teaching people. He was organizing communities. So he would be like Ikhwani Muslimin, Jamaati Islami. Mm-hmm. So all of these movements are combined within this man's life. This is what's so extraordinary about him. And as a young man in the field, just to give you an example, I want to bring this home to you to show you how deep his thoughts are and how they relate to us. As a young man in the field, this is around 1788. Okay, he started in 1774, but by 1778, he was moving from place to place, and when he moved, 1,000 students moved with him. Now imagine this, they're moving through the savannah and they stop under a big baobab tree, or a big rock, and that's like a moving university. And so the corrupt kings, the kings who had power at that time, and we know power usually corrupts. So the kings were, oppressing their people. They heard about him. So one of the kings in a place called Gober, Sultan Bawa, he invited Sheikh Uthman to the Eid celebration. They have big celebrations in northern Nigeria, Eid al-Adha. They ride their horses, and it's always been a very important. So he invited the scholars to come there. Sheikh Uthman shows up with 1,000 deep. He moves in, right? So everybody's turning and looking at him, right? So now the Sultan tries to assassinate him. And he runs an assassination game, and it fails. And then he offered Sheikh Uthman 500 mithqals of gold. He wanted to bribe him. Now think about our scholars today. Assassination didn't work, and so he wanted to bribe him. That didn't work. The Sheikh then said to him, I have 5 demands. Okay? He said 5 cloaks. Now, look at the relevancy of what he demanded. Number 1, he demanded of the king, he said that you allow me to call to Allah within your lands. to freely do the dawah and call to Allah. 2, that anybody who accepts this call, you do not stop him. You do not hold back anybody who responds to the call. 3, that in your land, people, the men who wear turbans and women who wear the veil will be respected. Now look how relevant that is today. 4,
Yes.
you must free all political prisoners.
Oh.
I'm talking today. I'm not talking the 60s. I'm not talking Imam Jamil.
Yes.
He said you must free all political prisoners. And 5, he said, do not burden your people with taxes. Lower the taxes. So this is economics now, right?
Yes, indeed.
Look how relevant this man is, right?
Yes.
He's not talking something out in the sky. He's saying free all political prisoners. And so these are the types of teachings. This is what he was doing. And then he went into the field, and the Sultan after that passed away. Another one took over. There was one worse than him. They eventually ended up attacking the Sheikh in his community. And at that point, the Sheikh took, he made Hijrah. He follows the Sunnah exactly. He makes Hijrah, migration, and all the people in the land started migrating to his town. They were attacked, and they were outnumbered. The enemy had better weapons, and they defeated their enemies. It was like a battle of Badr type of thing. And the Sheikh had a dream. Just before this, he saw the Prophet ﷺ in his dream. And the Prophet gave him the sword of truth. And so he went forward and defeated his enemies. And then the people from all sections of Hausa land, students who were with him, he gave them flags. And they opened up 250,000 square miles of territory. And they governed this under Sharia. They governed for over 100 years before the coming of the British, right? In the 19th and 20th century. This is close, right? So this is how relevant this man is, to what we are doing and what we are about. And so just to give you the whole context of his life, in 1804, from 1804 to 1810, that is the time of his struggle, his jihad and his struggle. He consolidated. And 1810 to 1817 is when they consolidated the state. So these are the different phases of his life. But you know what he did? After they had defeated the enemies and they opened up the territory, he then said to the leaders, I want to give the leadership over to you. You decide, on a leader to take over. I'm going to spend the rest of my life teaching. So he went to his village, and he spent the rest of his life teaching and advising and writing books to people. And he let the younger people who were more, fit, to handle this huge state. He let them take over. And he continued teaching and advising for the rest of his life. And he died at 63, the same age as Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. This man was Sunnah, right? Unbelievable person. Like his life should be studied by all movement leaders to really see some of the things that he was actually saying. I want to give you an example of some of these things just before, time runs away from us. When he went into the field and he was teaching, he got attacked by some of the scholars. They said, who do you think you are? And he even had a way that he would come out to teach. And this affected me because I was really under a lot of pressure. You can imagine in 1985, just in the field, 1,000 people for Jummah. And at that point, Arabs were there, they're speaking Arabic, listening to you. Indo-Pakistanis want some spirituality. Turks are there. There are African movement people there from Ethiopia. Somalis are there now. Everybody's in one place. Okay, so that's a lot of pressure. What Sheikh Uthman used to do, he would first make 2 rakats by himself, and he would dedicate what he's about to say to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when he went out to the people, it didn't matter who he was speaking to. If he spoke to some young students, if he spoke to scholars, it didn't matter, because he did it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so I used to, the crowd is outside and I'm in my office ready to come. And many people would get all jittery and everything. So I used some techniques. I would make 2 rakats, dedicate it, and then I would do about 20 knuckle push-ups. Because if you do if you do push-ups, it's like energy. They say if you have like butterflies in your stomach, if you're nervous, then exercise, do push-ups, right? So
Are you doing this in your office or in the musalla?
No, that's in the office. I don't want to get the wrong reputation, right? So I would do this. I would do these push-ups, and then the blood flows to you, right?
Yeah.
And then you're doing it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it doesn't matter who's out there.
Right.
And then I would go out and I would deliver my message. So this was his, and he would, when he spoke to the masses of the people, he would speak in their languages. And so he could speak for full day, the Fula language, the Hausa language. He also did poetry in Tamashekh, which is the Tuareg, the people of the desert. And his writings, and to scholars, he's in classical Arabic. So he's speaking to people based upon who he's actually talking to. And I want to give you a little taste that he said to the scholars. He said, I want to give you just 5 points that he made in one of his papers. He said, beware of the danger of wealth and position. Beware of this. And he goes into this whole discussion. 2, beware of the vice of praise. Beware of praise, when people start praising you too much. 3, beware of obstinacy, meaning being stubborn, and unnecessary disagreements. He's talking to scholars now. Now think about people fighting against school of thought and, my movement, your movement, Sufi, Salafi, Ikhwani, this and that. Beware of this. 4, he said, constantly do self-criticism. Criticize yourself constantly so that you will improve. And 5, he said, study the sins of the heart. You have to study, you have to beware of the sins of the heart. And that is like pride, jealousy, anger, conceit, the sins of the heart. He said, focus on this, because if your hearts go wrong, everything goes wrong. So by this, you put him in line with Imam al-Ghazali, with the main scholars in the Muslim world, Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawzi, the main scholars in the Muslim world. Okay, this is revival. This is exactly what revival is. And so he brought this out. Now, another important point, since I mentioned women, and that's so important to people today. This is 1774 to 1804. He came out and he found that women in Hausa land were ignorant, and they were not being trained with Islam. They were being crushed. And so he went out to the people, to the men, and to the community. He said, educate the women. Educate them. They didn't do it. And so he said to them, and this was revolutionary, he said to women, if your husband will not educate you, disobey him.
Ooh.
And come to my halaqah. Come to the study circles that we have established for women. You'll be protected as a woman. Come and get a woman's education. The scholars said, how dare you say something like this? And he said, the Prophet ﷺ said, La ta'a lil makhluq fi ma'siyatil khaliq. There is no obedience to the creation when the creation disobeys Allah. So he pushed for women to be involved, and his mother was a scholar, his wife was a scholar. He had daughters who were scholars. One of his daughters, Nana Asma'u, is considered to be one of the great African Muslim scholars of history. And you'll see people talking about Nana Asma'u. And so another thing that he did, which was amazing, they have a thing called FGM, which is female genital mutilation. It's
Yes.
female circumcision, right? Which is a big problem up until today. Back in the 18th century, he opposed FGM.
Mm.
And he proved Islamically why it was not right. And he stopped it amongst his people.
Mm-hmm.
This is back in the 18th century, right? And
Yes.
look at the relevance of that today. And his argument, actually, I was faced with this in our community because we had a very large East African community. And I studied his arguments. It was right on point. And I delivered this argument, to the Somali community, to the Ethiopian community, the Southern Egyptian community, those who are involved in this circumcision, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the Sunnah form that is allowed, but the mutilation, there is not allowed. That is something from the days of Pharaoh. And the Sheikh was right on point, when he looked at this situation. And so to continue on, to give you some of the essence, a taste of what we're studying, he spoke about spiritual remedies. Okay? What are some spiritual remedies? What do we actually need to protect our hearts from the shaitan wa iyadhu billah? He mentioned 10 things. Now this is really practical information. I'm just going to go through the 10. We need to have a discussion about what he said. But he said, number 1, beware of jealousy, Hassan.
Mm-hmm.
Beware of jealousy and, desiring the properties of other people, covetousness. 2, beware of the anger and uncontrolled desires. Anger, you want to protect your heart, right? You want to be a decent Muslim, you want to be successful, then watch out for anger. 3, beware of greed and ambition. Greed and ambition, these are the ways Shaitan gets to the hearts of people, right? So he's giving secret information. You want to protect yourself from evil. You want to have ihsan. And then he said, number 4, he said, beware of the excessive love of food and drink. Look how practical he is.
Mm-hmm.
If you love food and drink, you got a problem, right? It's your nafs, right? Yeah. Your lower desires, right? And you could easily be taken out by the shaitan. 5, he said, the danger of haste. Don't do things too fast. Take your time, except when things are necessary. Like, for instance, if the call for prayer comes, then just do it as soon as you can. But beware of haste. Okay? 6, beware of wealth, of money, if it exceeds what you need. If wealth exceeds your what's necessary, watch out. And that's where people fall. When they start getting too much money, you see how they change. 7, he said, beware of fanaticism in your school of thought. Now, that's a big one there, and that has destroyed many of our societies.
Yes, it is.
And he is Maliki. He took from Shafi'i scholars, he taught his followers how to respect other schools of thought. Mm-hmm. Number 8, beware of hatred and contempt for those who disagree with you. This is a big point. Somebody disagrees with you, don't hate them for it. Don't have contempt. Recognize that there are differences between people. Number 9, he said that there's a danger of burdening common people with aqidah discussions. Do not go into high philosophy discussions with the common masses of the people. Leave these discussions for the ulama who are trained to talk about it, and they know how to differ. Now, look at the problem that happened in our community with aqidah coming in, and extreme people fighting over aqidah.
Yes.
Okay, this is relevant stuff he's talking, right?
Very relevant.
And number 10, he said there's a danger in holding suspicion of Muslims. Do not have su'adhan. Do not have this suspicion of other Muslims. Now look how practical these 10 points are. So this is the type of teaching that I actually implemented in my life and gained from this scholar. It's a balanced approach. And to take it a step further, following our time, just so I connect certain points, remember, he was from the group called Turudbey. And the Turudbey Tarankawa scholars, they come out of the Fuller people, although in many cases, they're actually not Fuller. They recruited from all nationalities. Wolof, Susu, Hausa, Mandinka, but they would come into the Fuller or Fulbey clan, in the scholarly clan, and they would move with this group. They would intermarry into the group. And I was amazed to see that many of the enslaved African Muslims in the Americas were actually from this same group. Now, this is a finding which is coming to the surface. There are a number of scholars who brought this out before, but I think it's really, really relevant to us today. I want to give you an example of 4 people. Ayub Ibn Suleiman. Now, you will see the beautiful picture of Ayub Ibn Suleiman. You know, he came from the same Futa Toro region. He came from that region. He's clearly a Fulani. If you look at him, he's a Fula, and if you trace his life in the books that were written, that's where he comes from. Okay? Yado Mahmud, who's another famous patriarch of African Muslims, he actually comes from the same Futa Toro region. Omar Bin Sayyid was another famous African Muslim as well. He comes straight out of the Futa area. He studied under them. He is Turudbey. Okay, and also the prince Ibrahim Abdurrahman Sori, the famous prince among slaves. He is from the same region. Timbo. He's from Timbo, which is the Fuller land. I didn't realize this until I saw scholars talking about it. And I went back and looked, and I realized it's a movement. It's a movement of resistance. It is scholars who had the choice to change things with their hand or say something or feel it in their heart. I also recognize the fact that scholars like in Haiti, like Bookman, that revolutions in Bahia in Brazil, this same movement is there. And in Jamaica, which I spent many years in Jamaica, my wife is Jamaican. In 1812, there was a document that was being circulated amongst the slaves, many of them who could speak Arabic. That's been confirmed now. And a big revolt. This document was called Wathiqa. And the Sheikh had written a document, Wathiqa Ibn Fudi ila Ahl Sudan. It is his declaration of independence to the people of the Sudan. That's what it's considered to be. And that same document, or what appears to be that document, they're calling it Wathiqa. And when the people read this, they revolted in Jamaica. So this movement is relevant. This balanced approach is extremely relevant. And at the same time, it provides a hero for our young people. Because this is a scholar, and this is very rare, because you will read about scholars of the heart or great intellectuals, Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn al-Qayyim, scholars of the heart, Imam al-Ghazali, Sidi Ahmed Zarruq, and you hear many scholars, but you really see a scholar who taught his teachings, revived Islam, and then led a movement which was victorious and actually governed the land under Islamic law. I don't know any of the scholars who did that, because usually the people who take the land, who control the land. They're Salahuddin, or you think of Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih, right? But this is a scholar who actually a movement comes around him. He is not basically a warrior. His warrior is not necessarily his thing, but he resisted for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and his people resisted, and they ended up opening up the land and instituting the law of Allah for over 100 years. This is Sokoto, the Sokoto Caliphate. And they were recognized by the Sultan of Morocco and also by the Ottomans. Ottoman sultans recognized Sokoto. So this is a movement that was recognized by the Muslim world. And many Muslims even are not aware of this. And even worse, African Muslims, Black Muslims are not aware of this amazing achievement made by a great African scholar.
And I'm so glad, brother Abdullah, that you have embraced this as a very passionate, objective, intellectual and spiritual objective of pursuit. You know, rooted in your Islam, because clearly it's needed. And as I'm listening to you just sharing these bits and pieces of very important information about this one personality and the influence that he had, you know, in that part of Africa, the movement that he was a part of that had so much influence and did so much good for the people of that region. You know, I can't help but reflect upon the effects of internalized self-hatred and, you know, the inferiority complex that so many of our folk, both, you know, African-American, non-Muslim folk and Muslim folk, you know, they walk around with, and the, you know, the day-to-day consequences of that type of, you know, internalized self-hatred, that lack of having a feeling of purpose, of a feeling of roots, that are worth, you know, worthy of reflection. In the few minutes that we have left, you know, can you speak about the importance of this type of knowledge, this type of information, the impact that it can have on the consciousness of, you know, the African American polity across the board, and, you know, how it could be a source of uplift that could, you know, help us to navigate our way into a much better place.
Yes, this information is so critical. And when I was running the Discover Islam Center in Cape Town, and we connected with the IPCI of Sheikh Ahmed Deedat in Durban, and we formed a national Dawah group, and we traveled to every province in South Africa, to Swaziland, you know, to Namibia, all the frontline states, Lesotho, all the frontline states. And I used to carry a big banner, and we would always set this up, and it said information for transformation. So in other words, what you're learning today is not to go in one ear and out the other way. It is to transform. Right. That is the purpose of this information. And that is so important to us today, because this is the essence of Islamic revival. We want change, we cry for it. But Allah said very clearly, Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. In Surah Al-Ra'd, verse 11, Allah will not change the condition of a people till they change in themselves.
That's right.
Transformation is necessary. And so that is the purpose of this information, to cause an awakening, what I call an emergence type of thing. That this is revival. This is so critical across the board. All the countries that I went to, the communities, this is something which is across the board. The Muslims needed to be revived.
Yeah.
We have masjids, we have institutions, we have nice thobes, we have nice caps. But where is the deen? Where is the energy inside of us? That has to be revived, especially at this critical time in our history, when we are facing so many challenges internally and externally.
Absolutely. And I referenced, African American, and with a special emphasis on African American youth that are coming up now, especially during this very sensitive period of focus on Black lives and how Black lives matter. But this is across the board. It's not just in the United States. It's and other parts of the West, Canada, and Europe, Britain, France. But it's also on the African continent itself, that sleeping giant, where I'm sure that there is a lack of awareness, even in the motherland. There's a lack of awareness of this type of history.
That's right, and I was shocked to find out that even in Nigeria, which is the home of Sheikh Usman dan Fodio, where his teachings flourished, because of the colonial education, and because Islamic education was pushed to the side, many people, even in the north, are not aware of the depth of the teachings of Sheikh Usman dan Fodio. And then extremists come along, and they say Boko Haram, which means books are haram, right? And they lost their minds, and start killing people. So this terrorizes people. So there is a need for balanced Islam. Absolutely. There is a need for transformational teachings that are going to be a benefit for society and a benefit for the whole world.
Alhamdulillah, Sheikh Abdullah Hakim Quick, we are now at the end of today's program. I want to thank you, my brother, for being who you are, for being this conveyor of knowledge that you have been for all the years that I've known you. And it's alhamdulillah, may Allah Ta'ala continue to fortify you and to bless you with health and the energy to do what you do. And may Allah Ta'ala bless young men and women, to inherit this zeal for wanting to acquire this kind of information, useful knowledge, and share it the way that you have done. You have any final thoughts? A 1 minute final thought, inshallah.
Yes. Again, as we said, information for transformation. I want to bring more people on board. There's still time. We're teaching the African Sunrise. My website is hakimquick.com, HAKIMQUICK.com. And you go there and you go to courses and you see African Sunrise. And you can still join on. We are professionally filming each session. So anybody who joins on will get, eventually they'll get a copy of the first session, and they can join the next session, which is coming on Saturday, inshallah, 1:30 Eastern Standard Time. And if you can't pay for it, we have scholarships, we have sponsorships. We leave nobody behind. So you can apply for the scholarship, the sponsorship, and inshallah, we can get you on board, as well. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive all of us for our mistakes and our weaknesses, and unite the believers and take us from darkness into light. I leave you with these thoughts. Wa akhir da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And due to circumstances beyond my control, I missed yesterday, but inshallah ta'ala, I will be with you next Saturday. Inshallah, How many Saturdays will it be? Will this course
This will be every Saturday in Black History Month. So
okay.
there's three left.
Okay. All right.
Three Saturdays
Alhamdulillah.
left.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you again, Sheikh Abdullah Hakim. Quick. We close as we normally do with Asr. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wal Asr. Innal insana lafi khusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa amalu salihati. Wa tawassaw bil haqq. Wa tawassaw bis sabr. Which means, in translation of the meaning, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, by the token of time through the ages, verily humanity is in loss, except those who believe and do good, and exhort one another to truth, and exhort one another to patiently persevere. Peace be unto you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.